everybody hear me out there? Folks in back, we good? All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Matt Yunker. I'm the assistant editorial page editor at the BDN. And thank you for joining this installment of Bangor Daily Brews. This is a new event series that we've been doing, trying to have big conversations in small settings like this one. So thank you all for being a part of it. I hope you all brought some questions. But we are talking about Maine's aging population tonight and the effects that's having statewide on the economy and also here in our communities. And so we have a very talented group of speakers here who are hopefully going to shed some light on the issue for us. And then hopefully you guys will have some questions as well. Just some quick housekeeping. Thank you to Nocturnum for having us. It's Zach there over by the water cooler. If you haven't been told already, someone's going to be coming around taking orders, so no need to go over into the bar. But what we're going to do first, we're going to start with a panel discussion for about 20 minutes, led by editorial page editor Susan Young, who hopefully I'm not blocking too much right now. And then we're going to turn it over to you guys for questions, and that's what we're going to spend most of our time here doing. Just also want to let you guys know we're having a separate Dirigo Speaks event through the BDN on Thursday over on Hudson campus at the Gracie Theater, talking about Title IX with a local attorney. So if anybody's interested in that, hopefully you'll join us as well. But I'm going to get to our panel real quick, give you some quick introductions, and then turn it over to them so you don't have to listen to me anymore. But first we have Amanda Rector, who is the state economist, a role she's held since 2011. And then we have the Department of Labor Commissioner, Laura Fortman. This is her second stint as commissioner, and she's also worked at the U.S. Department of Labor as well. And then, last but certainly not least, we have Cathy Conlow, who is the city manager here in Bangor. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan now. They're going to have a conversation for about 20 minutes, and then again, open the floor to all of you for questions.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I'm Susan Young. I'm the editorial page editor of the Bangor Daily News. As Matt said, Bangor Daily Brews is something new we're trying this year. I think this is our fifth or sixth,
I believe.
We decided this year to focus on 4 issue areas. One of them is workforce development that we're going to talk about tonight. Another is referendum reform, looking at the question of whether it's too easy to get things on the ballot. Should it be more difficult? Should there be geographic requirements? We're also looking at on climate change as well. And it's great to see some folks, I think the Zoms have come to every single one of these, so thank you very much. We appreciate it. And afterwards, we would love to hear from you if you have ideas of other topics kind of related to those areas, speakers that you want to hear from, different perspectives on any of those topics. It would be really great to hear from you guys, because certainly Matt and I don't have all the best ideas in the world, so we want to hear from you as well. So with that introduction, we'll get going on this important topic of Maine's demographic future with an eye towards workforce development. And Laura and Amanda and I talked a little bit about this before the event. You know, it's often presented as a very bleak picture. There's more births than deaths in Maine. We're the oldest state in the more deaths than births. If we have a lot of births. And Laura was commissioner of the Department of Labor, put out a report that I now understand may have been misinterpreted, that said only 94 net new jobs would be created in Maine by 2026. And Amanda has a report. There is population growth in Maine, which is a good thing, but it's about 10,000 people by 2026, which again doesn't sound like an overwhelming number. So we're going to jump right in and have the two of them explain those numbers, what it really means, and what we should take from those reports.
So I think, and again, as Susan said, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's really exciting. One of the things I love the most is to be able to actually get out and engage in dialogue and hear the questions that you have, and also to hear how some of the material that's put out by the Department of Labor is actually interpreted. And the report that was put out before I came on board at the department was this report put out by our Center for Workforce Research and Information. And the takeaway by many people and journalists was people in general and journalists was there are only 94 new jobs going to be created in the state of Maine between now and 2026. And our chief economist almost lost his mind when he saw that as the interpretation, because it is much more nuanced. First of all, the data is looking backward and then projecting that if nothing, absolutely nothing changes, where are you seeing jobs being created? And it does not in any way take into account new things that are happening, new public policies that are created, new businesses that crop up, or replacement jobs. And the other question that you said, Susan, well, if there are 10,000 new people, and there are only 94 jobs, doesn't that mean that we really have too many people for the jobs? And as we're having this conversation tonight, you know that that's not true. That what we are seeing is that the labor, the size of the labor force has stayed about the same for about the last 14 years, which is roughly 700,000 people. But as we'll get into tonight, it's really, we're seeing jobs being created, jobs being replaced, and that's really the conversation that I want to dive into. So don't worry, there are plenty of jobs for all of the people who are here, and we're really looking at trying to increase the number of people as well as the quality of those jobs.
So I'm going to talk about the population outlook. What I do every 2 years is I update population projections for the state, for counties, and for towns and municipalities. I do this largely because nobody else does. So by default, I thought it was important information for people to have. And so I look at recent trends and then sort of the most recent data when I'm updating those projections. So 2016 to 2026 was the most recent batch that I did last December, so almost a year ago. I'll update them next year. 0.8% growth in the population, I think it was, from 2016 to 2026. I know that does not sound like very much. It's actually an improvement over the previous round of projections where we actually were declining, I think, in that time period. So my hope is that when I do the next set, we'll see continued improvements in those projections, because we have seen continued improvements in the population estimates. So every year the Census Bureau releases population estimates for the state. As we get further out from the decennial, which is what their sort of baseline is, they get a little dicier. So at this stage of the game, as you can imagine, with the decennial coming next year, they're probably the worst that they could be in terms of accuracy. But we have the past couple of years seen some improvements in terms of more population growth, which then feeds into those population projections. Because as with the outlook on the employment side, it's taking recent trends and sort of extrapolating them forward into the future for some period of time. So if the recent trends improve, which they have been, then the projections will also improve.
Can you tell us a little bit more, Amanda, about why the projections are improving? Who is going to come to Maine? Why is the population growing? As I misspoke, we have more deaths than births, so we don't have enough people being born here. So how is the population growing, and what do those newcomers look like?
Yeah, so we have had, since about the beginning of the decade, more deaths than births each year, and that gap has been widening. As you might imagine, we have the oldest population of any state in the U.S. 44.9 years is the median age. We've been first in that measure for a long time. We are now actually also first on another measure, which is the percent of the population aged 65 and older. Florida had been ahead of us for a long time, and we have now surpassed Florida on that particular measure. So we're first in a couple of different respects, and not in a position that we would like to be in. One of the times when first is not necessarily best. But I think that one of the things that we've been seeing recently is an increase in migration into the state. And so that had been actually earlier in the decade negative, so more people moving from Maine to other parts of the U.S. than vice versa. More recently, the past couple of years, we've seen considerably more people moving to Maine than from Maine. And so we've managed to more than offset the natural decline that we've been seeing. And I think the thing that is particularly encouraging for me, when I look at those migration figures, the most recent ones, so coming from a slightly different source, the American Community Survey from the Census Bureau rather than their population estimates program. If we look at the American Community Survey data, across the different age cohorts, we actually had positive net domestic migration in all but one, and the one that was negative was 75 and over. So across all of the other age cohorts, we had more people moving into Maine from other parts of the US than out of Maine. And particularly strong in some of the younger age cohorts as well. So I think that if you look at that and sort of pair it with what we've seen in terms of the really strong economy and the employment growth, I think there are some indications that people are moving into the state to take some of the jobs that are available. And I think that one of the other pieces of it that's been interesting is that while much of that growth has been concentrated in sort of the greater Portland region, there are some signs in the more recent data that that's starting to spread further across the state. So more counties are starting to see positive migration than there were earlier in the decade.
We've talked already a lot about projections and facts and figures, and Cathy, I want to bring you into the conversation because communities are kind of where the rubber hits the road with these numbers. And I wonder, what for a community like Bangor, which I think the population is growing, which is a good thing, but on the flip side, what does the aging population mean for city services and also for the tax base for paying for those services? So if you can kind of give us a snapshot of what Bangor is seeing.
So I often talk about Bangor and we talk about the demographics of Bangor. We are, in fact, one of the younger cities in the state of Maine. I think our average age is somewhere around 37 and a half. Now, we are heavily influenced by a university population, which certainly brings down that age. But I think some of the things we're seeing, so we have two things going on. We have had a lot of job creation, significantly more than 94. And for the first time in probably 2 decades, we have no vacant buildings left, which is a good thing. We have expansion that occurred with CNL Aerospace. They took up a lot of our vacant parcels out there. We had expansion at Wayfair, which picked up sort of the slack we thought we were going to lose from. I'm sorry. I thought I unmuted it.
Go for you.
Oh, no. Sorry.
Make the light green.
Now there's no light.
I got it. Wait. Sorry, apologize. I got a red and a green on that.
Yeah, has to tap again.
There we go. Got it. Thank you. Sorry. So from a city perspective, we do have had a lot of job growth. One of the things that we're seeing is that the skill sets don't naturally meet up with some of the jobs that we're seeing. CNL is a good example of that, where we need more technical trades, airspace, engineering kinds of things. From the rest of the challenges of dealing with an aging population, we were the 100th city to join the AARP, Livable Cities group. We have had a very active planning group taking a look at how we make our city more age-friendly. And when you look at the factors that go into age-friendly, I think you're going to see that that's really just about making a city a really great place to live. It's about walkability, it's about accessibility, it's about transit, it's about having places for people to go and overcome social isolation. So we have a really great group working on that. I don't have all the solutions for that, but we are pretty active in terms of how we deal with our aging population.
I think that's a really good point to talk about making communities in the state a better place for an aging population to live makes it better for everyone. As you talk about walkability, public transportation, green spaces, things that we all want. I'm wondering if you can all talk just a little bit about the interface between state and municipal governments in terms of workforce development and also planning for the aging population. You know, we think of the state more as the policy folks, and I know you get a lot of federal grant money that flows through to the municipalities, but how do you work together, and you know, how does that flow go both directions?
Sure, so I'll talk a little bit about the workforce development system, and there are a couple of folks in the room here who are like the local face of the workforce development system. The money comes into the state, but then goes out to local workforce investment boards, and the boards are made up of county commissioners, local business owners. The boards must be at least 51% business, and then the service providers in the community. And there's a planning process, and you'll be hearing about that planning process pretty soon, because there's a requirement to have a new workforce development plan in the spring of 2020. And the way that plan is developed is by going out into the communities, working with the local boards, gathering all of that information, so that feeds it on the state level in terms of overall demographic information. What are we seeing about potential job growth? How do you align systems like the community college and other training providers with the needs? And then what are the opportunities in the community? So we can provide some of the big picture statewide information, but then really rely on the local communities to say, well, you maybe think that that's what is going on from Augusta, but the reality is on the ground, Cathy will be able to say, oh, no, we really need that technical training in these areas. And so then how can we support them doing that kind of local work?
And I think that's really accurate. There are a lot of resources. And if I even just look at our own workforce at the city and the kinds of jobs we have and the technology that's coming, how do we as a municipality, we're somewhat slow to move, how do we keep our workforce up to date in new technology? And I think that's going to mean better partnerships with the workforce board, better partnerships with our community colleges. We're exploring different ways to work with them. If we're going to maintain our workforce, we really feel like we need to grow our leadership from within. We talk about municipal work used to be a lifelong career and maybe generational, and we don't see that anymore. So how do we reignite that passion in municipal work? And that's going to come through partnerships with different state agencies or different regional agencies to try to develop in-house training, to try to get technical courses, and to try to really make it so people, because it's a passion, being here, being in the community, working for government, local government in particular, is a passion. And so how do we ignite that passion in our workforce using some of the resources that are available to us?
I think the other thing that I would add is that a lot of what I see my job as being is helping people to understand what's happening with the data. And so I do a lot of interaction with folks at all levels across the state, just trying to help them understand this is what the numbers look like, this is what it means for your community. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I've spoken to like towns that are doing comprehensive planning. I'll go in and say, okay, here's some data around the state and larger trends, and then what I have for that community as well. We do have some resources on our website as well in terms of making data available at sort of a one-stop shop. We exclude most of the employment data because Department of Labor has a really great website of their own. I will plug their website quite happily. But we've tried to pull together a lot of different census data and data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis and some of the other sources that are out there, so that folks who are looking for numbers can go to one place, and if they can't find it there, then I often get calls saying, help, I'm looking for numbers and I don't know where to go. So I think for me, being able to get out in terms of presentations is helpful, but then also hearing from folks about what sort of data they are looking for, so that we are always trying to make our website better and our sort of provision of data to people better and more applicable to what they're looking for.
When we're looking at the workforce, we talk a lot about growing Maine's workforce, and Laura, you gave us some good insights on this the other day. We talk a lot about bringing more people to Maine, and we'll talk more about that tonight, I'm sure. But the first step is to make sure that the people in Maine are, as they're capable, participating in the workforce. So can you talk a little bit more about growing Maine's workforce from within and increasing that participation, especially of groups that have too often, unfortunately, been left behind?
Right, exactly. As we're at a time where we really want to make sure that everyone who wants to work is able to participate. So some of those groups that have been left on the sidelines in the past are groups like older workers. We've also partnered with AARP. We're piloting some job fairs where we actually go out to independent living centers with employers and then just have a small meeting like this where you've got people who are perhaps interested in going back into the workforce either because they need to for additional resources, or just because they really want to do something in the community. And we're trying to set up those meetings so that employers can meet those potential workers and explore whether or not it's a good fit. And we're doing that with other populations as well. One group of folks are people who are formerly incarcerated. We recently had it wasn't really a job fair, but it was more of a panel discussion where we were at the prison in Wyndham, and we had people who were involved in the pre-release program partnered with employers who they were working for. There were between 50 and 60 employers there who listened to the panel discuss the benefits of the relationship as well as any hesitation they had had before hiring people. And we're really seeing employers stepping up to the plate to work with formerly incarcerated people. And they were saying, even though there are several federal, there's a federal bonding program and a tax credit that can be used by employers for hiring people who have barriers. The employers on the panel were saying, that was intriguing to get us interested, but we really have a good relationship with these folks. They're hardworking and they're dedicated. Another group of people are people with disabilities. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities is significantly higher than the 2.9% for the general population. Fourth group of people are veterans. We do a hire a vet program where in 100 days we're trying to get 100 veterans hired, and we have 326 employers who are participating in that effort. So, and then we do have some of the people that Amanda was talking about, new Mainers, who may be facing barriers around English language or credentialing, but it's a pool of people who have skills. And so we've been doing a lot of outreach with that population, trying to figure out how to have those credentials transferred and working with employers. And employers are saying to us, come in, talk with us, and help us with some cultural competency. So, and as well as young workers, getting them into the workforce as soon as possible. So it's a time with, Cathy was talking about that the skills are all over the map that are needed, and this is an opportunity for people to really pursue whatever their passion is, because I'm pretty sure people are looking for you.
So it's kind of interesting, sort of tagging on that skill thing. One of the things my daughter took a job this past year in California as a software engineer, but that's not what her degree is in. And I said, I really don't understand why. Why? And she said, technology is something that we're all learning together. There is no, I don't have a leg up, or, I mean, some people are really quick at learning it. So you're looking for people who can learn those skills and learn them quickly. So you're looking for, I don't know if the right word is aptitude, but you're looking for somebody with the attitude and the aptitude to want to learn those skills. And that can come in any age, shape, or form. And so it's an opportunity with the skill set all over the board. There is an opportunity with a group of people all over the board in terms of age and background and things like that to connect them with it. It's going to take more work on our part to make those connections, but I think that the workforce and the technology is such that people will have an opportunity at all ages to participate in the workforce. I also think if you go back to the livable communities and the age-friendly communities and you talk about social isolation, I think these kinds of jobs, job sharing, job flexibility, the ability to train and work with people, you're going to really have the opportunity to create a community that embraces, again, people from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds. And from our standpoint, from the standpoint of the city of Bangor, that makes a much better place to live. Makes a place where people want to come and be.
Thank you, and certainly I think we're having a good conversation so far, but I want to open it up to audience questions because we build it as, you know, time for you to come and talk to the experts, and I really appreciate you putting a more positive spin on what is often portrayed as kind of a negative future. So we'll give Matt the microphone, and if you have questions, just raise your hand.
And everybody just please introduce yourself, and I'm going to run the microphone around, so if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand.
I'm Dennis Marble, and I'm renowned for asking long questions, so I'll try to make this manageable. It seems to me that as a state sometimes I feel like we're somebody's stepchild, and the natural jobs are at the low end of the wage scale. So for example, tourism, healthcare, especially of elderly, and I'm leaving out a third one, but there are three broad, deep areas of employment that can get people employed but don't help them rise up, don't result in real gains. I was intrigued by the question about how do we partner municipal and state. And the monkey wrench I want to throw into this is a legislature with a 2-year cycle that seems to be always running for re-election. How the hell do we generate a real plan as a state, given those factors?
I'll take that one. So we have been working quite frantically over the past 6 months on a 10-year economic strategic plan for the state. And we have a draft due to the governor in about 10 days. So we're rapidly bearing down on sort of the final phase of this. We've done a lot of outreach over the course of the process, trying to get engagement from people around the state and trying to really understand what are the issues that we're facing and where are the places where we have some assets and some potential growth so that we can really start to make a significant impact on Maine's economy. Several of the things that you mentioned are things that we heard as we were out talking to people. So part of what we are trying to do is identify how can we create more of a sense of stability and reliability for people so that we aren't sort of in this constant 2-year churn. Where are places where we can sort of come to businesses and say, we're going to have some stability for you so that you know that when you make an investment or make a decision, things aren't going to change in the next 6 months. And the other piece of what we were looking at is, you know, if you look at the state's economy, then yes, there are a lot of jobs that are in things like healthcare and in retail trade and some of the leisure and hospitality related jobs and industry sectors. There are places in the economy, and we had some really terrific support from folks, my team, and then folks at the university system and some former state economists, lots of economic talent working together to sort of drill into the numbers and come up with places where we see these larger trends that are happening sort of at the global economy level, intersecting with places in Maine's economy where we have some areas of expertise, some assets, some things that are already going right here so that we can then leverage that into sort of additional potential growth. And so we're trying to see how we can sort of make an environment for those things to really take off. And it's an interesting mix of things that we came up with because there are certainly some things that would be maybe unexpected, and we didn't really identify particular industries. We came up with sort of broader themes that emerged because it was sort of a mix of different types of jobs and different skill sets and different businesses that were all sort of popping up on that level. But certainly the idea that we need to have this longer term plan out there so that we can try to make some really concerted efforts going forward. And workforce is a huge part of it, both in terms of the skills and in terms of attracting more people, because we do just need more people, even if we get all of those underemployed groups fully engaged.
Yeah, and I just want to add something from the kind of workforce side of the house. As Amanda said, there's a commitment on the part of the governor and people from all over the state to really come up with a 10-year economic development plan that is meaningful, that is not partisan in any way, and that will last across any changes. Once that economic development plan is finished in the next couple of weeks, one of the ways to make sure it actually gets implemented is that people will need to kind of take ownership of the pieces that are within their wheelhouse. And so on the workforce development side of it, it's to look at, how do you support quality jobs, and then what can we do to take those industries that have high demand but not necessarily high wages, and how can we improve either the quality of those jobs or stay with those workers so that you may start out at maybe an entry-level position for you. In the past, what's happened with workforce development is it's kind of been a one and done. Lee comes in, he meets with us, we say, oh, this is what you need, here's your assessment, you go off and you get that, and we're done with you. Now we're saying, no, this is where you're starting, but we're going to stay with you so that you can actually get to that place where you have a career that allows you to support yourself. And some of the avenues that we're using to do that are things like apprenticeship that has learn while you earn, as well as guaranteed training, because there is a requirement for training, and you end up with a portable credential that's actually useful. So we're getting very long-winded here, or at least I am.
So, and also to that end, I think there's always been sort of, the municipal governments have always kind of turned that flywheel, right? There's always some continuity. We recognize, and I think up here in particular, speaking to the regional issue, we've been resilient, and I think in a lot of ways we've worked creatively to create opportunity for ourselves. And I think, we're looking now and we're saying, okay, we're having a shortage of people in certain fields, and how do we attract them and keep them? Because purpose and salary and benefits aren't enough. We need to grow our own talent, and that's when we reach out to the state colleges, or to the workforce investment boards, or whoever, to help us develop some of those programs. We have some programs with the NDC. We have some programs that we're now looking at, and try to do that. But we're no longer doing that by ourselves. We're doing that with other municipalities, and I think we recognize and have been able to adapt. Sometimes we're a little slow to adapt, but I think we keep turning. There's been consistency among the municipalities towards continuing to sort of churn out solutions.
Sheila's there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we're saying and what often gets passed in the legislature. The technical school in Bangor is terrific, and it needs more money, and I'm sure others around the state need more money, but recently there was a proposal for more funding, and it didn't pass. And these facilities are training people for jobs that are going to be higher pay than the tourism and the personal care jobs, and yet we're not following through on it everywhere else. And the other issue I wondered if you could talk about, you talked about getting people recertified when they come to Maine in certain professions. And my understanding is that for teachers or people who come from other states, it's particularly torturous process, and if that could be fixed, it might help the workforce.
Okay, so I want to do a disclaimer here. I am neither a legislator nor the Commissioner of Education, but I work very closely, as does Amanda, with the Commissioner of Education. And when we look at workforce development, the kind of three prongs are really education, workforce development, and economic development. And the Commissioner of Education has heard loud and clear the teacher certification, and they are focused on examining to see what they can be doing. There have also been multiple meetings within just the last probably 5 weeks between the CTEs, the career technical schools, and the Department of Labor and the Department of Education to see what we can all be doing to, again, as Cathy's saying, this is about collaboration. There is no one part of government, there is no one agency that can be doing it on its own. It has to be government working with business, working with education, and philanthropy in order to have the kind of comprehensive, cohesive solutions and plans that we need. So there's a commitment on our part to do all of those things. And by our, I mean the entire administration.
All right, who else has a question?
Good evening, my name is Kim, and this is kind of to expand a little further on Sheila's question. I moved to Maine, excuse me, in June, so I not only added,
In migration, we love it.
Yeah, I added to your population, but also I bumped probably that average age up. I come from a background in K-12 education, so my question was, excuse me, what are you doing specifically to reach out to high school populations? Because so many of them, as you probably know, kind of wander through 12 years of education and it ends, and then they're like, oh my God, now what? So what are you doing to help channel them to some of these career areas, working with administration and teachers to channel them toward the career fields where there is the biggest skills gap and the most need?
So, again, I'll go back to, Amanda mentioned our webpage. The Center for Workforce Research and Information provides a lot of that data about high wage, high demand jobs. So people can, we encourage teachers, school counselors to look at that data. We will go out, the career centers would go into the schools and talk to folks. We received a request this week to come and do a job fair with students. We are happy to engage in all of that. I want to focus on one population in particular, though, is that one of the groups of people I had said earlier is that we have a very high unemployment rate for people with disabilities. One of the things that we're doing, I didn't say what the department includes. I mean, in the Department of Labor, we have the Bureau of Employment Services, the Bureau of Unemployment Services, labor market information, employment standards, the Bureau of Labor Standards, and the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So anything that touches on jobs, or helping people understand jobs, helping employers understand jobs, keeping people safe on the job, Department of Labor is a good place to check if you have any of those questions. Our Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services has started reaching out to 14-year-olds in schools to connect with them early on so that those students do have a work plan, because what we have seen in particular is that students with disabilities, when they're they need bigger aspirations about what is possible, and then if they don't have that, then they frequently get lost, and they fall into that category of, those 18 to 24-year-olds who are not connected to school or to work. So our Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation has really targeted providing support services to those students, including doing apprenticeships And one of the programs that we did this summer was right here at the University of Maine, where a cohort of students came and stayed at the university, took a university class, they got 1 credit, they were also working while they were up here, and the transformation for them and for their parents was incredible, because the parents were frequently just as excited and surprised about how well their child had done and about the future it had for them as the student was. So we're trying to increase aspirations, connect people to services, and make sure that people know that there is a future for them.
All right, who's next? Right over here.
Hi, my name is Ben Hale. I teach human geography at John Baptist High School, where we study things like Maine demographic trends. I believe I've used one of your PDFs, like in population pyramids. And so you talked about like Maine's population growing, but at a rather slow pace. But some counties are experiencing some pretty large loss. I think it was Piscataquis County projected to lose over 10% of the population in the next, I believe it was 10, 20 years, I don't remember the time frame. One of the things we look at in class is like other places, either within the country or globally, that try to have incentives for people to move to some of these spots. One of the ones notably is in Vermont, where they offer, I think it's $10,000 to move to the States, so they have similar demographic trends as we have. My question is, do those plans work? So is that actually helping? And if so, is that something that the state of Maine is exploring, something that there's a financial incentive to move to the state, whether it's state as a whole or to specific communities that really need it in some of those places that the population is declining?
So let me talk about Vermont first, because I sit on the advisory board for the New England Public Policy Center that the Boston Fed runs. And at our last meeting, somebody asked because it's all New England, and so the Vermont folks were there, and somebody asked them, so this $10,000 remote worker thing we heard about, how's that go? And they sort of laughed. They're like, it's just sort of a PR trick, because really it's not a lot of people. It's like 100 people. But everybody's talking about it. I will say that in the most recent state-to-state migration, we actually had more people moving to Maine from Vermont than we had moving from Maine to Vermont, vice versa. So I'm not sure it's working out all that well for them. But I do think that, a couple of things that this is something that we talked about pretty extensively as we've been working on this 10-year economic plan, is how do we particularly attract young workers and young families to the state, because that's sort of a twofer, because you get hopefully the current workforce and then the next generation workforce as well. We do have the Opportunity Maine tax credit, which is something that needs significant overhaul because it's incredibly convoluted right now, but with all of that, it is still really the best program of its type in the entire nation in terms of getting student loan relief when you are working here in the state. It's a little complicated in terms of it's been through a few different iterations, so depending on when you graduated and what year it was and where you graduated from, you get sort of different levels of qualification. I think that could use, and I know that there are discussions going on around how to potentially sort of simplify and streamline that so it is vastly improved. I think the other thing is that trying to figure out how we can connect folks with what they need to make the move to Maine, particularly in some of those rural communities, things like broadband access. The number of people, particularly young adults, who their first question is, can I get high-speed internet at my house? And if the answer is no, that's it, that's a deal breaker. And then other things like access to childcare services, access to ongoing educational opportunities and a good K-12 education system, transportation, affordable and available housing, all of those different pieces of the puzzle. And part of it, of course, is, do I have a job waiting for me that has a good wage and can support me going forward. And in many cases, it's maybe one spouse or one partner has that, and the other doesn't. And so what do you do then? And so there are a lot of sort of different moving pieces that you have to account for to make the sale for somebody to move to a different location. And so I think we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how do we address those, particularly for those rural communities that have been much harder hit. There are similarities sort of across the state. Housing, for example, is an issue almost universally across the state, just in different versions in different places. So in some places it may be a matter of availability, in some it may be affordability, in some it may be the particular type. Maybe there's single family to buy, but there's nothing to rent. Those are all really difficult and important questions, and if we can get the right solution to them, then I think that moves us well along the path of being able to reverse some of those demographic trends.
I think there's also the Live and Work in Maine initiative.
Yes.
You probably know
Yeah,
about that.
so Live and Work in Maine is a partnership between private and some of I think the state is a partner in it now as well. I think it started originally just as private sector, and it's trying to connect the employer community with people who may potentially be moving to the state. So in a lot of cases they're targeting boomerangers, which is people who maybe have some connection with the state but aren't living here currently. Maybe they went to college here or they grew up here and they're away somewhere else now, and so we want them back. And so how do we utilize those existing connections and tie them into this employment network that's out there to really connect them with the employment opportunities and the jobs, so that it makes their decision to come back a little easier.
And they started doing special recruitment over Thanksgiving, so that when people are coming home to visit their family, they're trying to get information out to parents and grandparents saying, guess what, Maine is a great place to live and work, and there's an opportunity here for you. So there will be, and it is the Department of Economic and Community Development that's working with them on that. So look for more information about that.
If I could just put in a little plug, our next Bangor Daily Brews is November 20th, and it will feature Live, Work in Maine. We're piggybacking they're having a conference in Bangor, so you'll get emails, so sign up and come join us for a conversation with those folks as well.
All right, next question.
My name is Doug Dunbar, and thank you all for being here. Commissioner, thank you for your leadership and for all you're doing, and thank you for mentioning folks who are re-entering our communities and our workforce from places of incarceration. I'm new to the workforce development world. I'm a relatively new employee at Eastern Maine Development Corporation, and we are expanding our efforts to reach out to people who are in recovery from substance use disorders, which I am, and to people who have a criminal record or are re-entering our communities from jails and prisons. And I, after 30 years working in the governor's office where I knew you years ago, and working in Congress, other places, I spent 136 days in jail and have 2 felonies now. And when I was released, I was fortunate that I had a friend who was at Eastern Maine Development Corporation and gave me a chance to come and work on what I'm passionate about these days, which is helping people who are marginalized and who are often forgotten. 70 million Americans, 70 million, have a criminal record. And so we have so many people, young people, many who have never had a chance before, who could be, whoops, I apologize, that's my phone. And because I don't drive, and won't drive again for another year or so, that's my 84-year-old father, God bless him, who picks me up and drives me around. I'm very blessed, indeed. But Eastern Maine Development Corp, speaking of plugs, EMDC, if you know young people in high school, as you mentioned, we are really looking to work with people who are 16 to 24, anyone at all. There are some eligibility requirements, but we really have resources. We administer, as the commissioner knows, some federal programs. There are real dollars, real resources to help people get into high wage, high demand fields. And again, we're expanding our outreach to people in recovery, in reentry circumstances, and people with criminal records. You know, people of that 70 million, many of those people carry that criminal record around as though it's a ball and chain that they never can escape. Fortunately, the economy doing so well, it's a time where applicants are given a second look. But we really need to be doing more of that. These are people who could be very good employees. There are many studies that indicate that people in recovery are some of your best employees. So again, a plug for EMDC. If my boss is here, I hope he heard. Thank you very much. So, way to go, Doug. All right.
Any response or next question? Who's up next?
Hi, I'm Joe. I had another question about the county's observation. I don't remember if it was Laura or Amanda speaking about immigration to counties and out-migration from counties, but were there any surprises in there, in particular in counties where maybe you weren't expecting to see growth, where you are starting to see growth?
Good question. You know, I think that one of the things, and what I think what I was talking about was the population estimates the most recent year. If you sort of look at the list of counties where the migration was positive, it's longer than it was earlier. I think that some of them are a little more, you know, the two that have the most are Cumberland and York. That's unsurprising. I think that there are still some counties that are maybe surprising because they're not on the list. I think there are a couple of the mid-coast counties that still aren't really seeing a lot of population growth. And much of the counties that are not seeing population growth are still along sort of what we think of as the rim counties, if you sort of follow the Canadian border around and then lump Piscataquis in with that group. So, you know, I think that there's some positive direction in terms of the list. Certainly, we still have a ways to go to sort of spread that population growth throughout the rest of the state. And I think that there are challenges that some of those counties face, having seen, in many cases, decades of population declines. There are 3 counties in the state that had sort of their peak population in a decennial year other than the most recent one. You would expect in general populations increase over time, so you'd expect that everybody's population peak was the most recent decennial, 2010. And in 3 counties it wasn't. It was, in some cases, quite a bit earlier. I think Washington County peaked maybe in 1900, and then Aroostook and Piscataquis are the other 2, and all 3 of those are sort of in the rim portion of the state. Those have some particular challenges because of that sort of long trend of population declines. So there are certainly some particular focus points that need to happen around those parts rather than sort of what we want to do to continue the growth in the southern part of the state, because certainly we don't want to lose that, but we do need to sort of refocus efforts on the parts of the state that have additional challenges.
And I think that with the economic development plan, one of the things that the governor was very clear about was that it was a statewide plan and that it needed to include, you know, the rural parts of the state as well. So that it was not just focus on, as Amanda said, things that are going well and build that. Yes, you want to make that happen, but also look at how can you really strengthen and develop more resiliency in the other parts of the state. And getting back to, I mean, we had mentioned boomerangs before. There was also a study from New Hampshire about, because New Hampshire is another state that has an aging population, And they were looking at how do you have young people there, and the study that they had done, it was a longitudinal study, but they found that the number one reason that young people were staying in rural communities was a sense of connection and feeling validated, so that they were actively engaged and listened to in their communities. So it's not always just about economic opportunity, as Cathy was saying earlier. It's like, what's that whole package? How do you feel like you're a part of something?
Cathy, can you jump in and talk a little bit about a service center community's kind of role in fostering that economic development, spreading out kind of like a hub and spoke system, as Bangor does well, surrounding communities do well as well.
So, and I think that's a good point. And even at one point, I was the town manager in Orono, and I described myself as, people would say, where do you live? I live in Bangor. I live outside of Bangor. And they'd say, oh, okay. If you'd say Orono, they didn't know. I mean, Bangor has long been the hub of the region, and the job creation in the service center community attracts lots of people. Again, people from all walks of life. But I think as the economy has grown over the last, let's say over the last 5 to 6 years, I think it was Carol Epstein recently did a market study that really showed that this area, and if you extrapolate for the mall area, if you take a look at the mall area, which everybody, I don't know how many of you were around 10 years ago or 9 years ago when I said, talking about the casino not working is like talking about the mall not working, and now, that was bad karma. So, but if you pull out the mall, the area of Bangor and the immediate surrounding region are really doing well. We have less available office capacity. We have no building manufacturing sites left, and we've seen expansions. We've seen Ketchel Ice. We've seen Wayfair again, filling that gap for when U.S. Cellular took its call center out of here, and we've seen the expansion of C&L, and we've seen significant amount of expansion that have filled the gaps. There are also jobs in the city and in the community, like wastewater treatment plant, and all of a sudden it didn't really dawn on us. We've had difficulty filling those, and as jobs in Bucksport were lost in the mill, all of a sudden those are translatable skills to Bangor. So where we've had difficulty, and it's a shame. I mean, we don't want to say that we've benefited from some of the mill closures in other communities, but those skill sets have translated directly to municipal operations. If you take a look at the new fiberite plant that's operating now in Hamden, those skill sets also translate to the pulp and paper industry. So we are now in a position where we have sort of strengthened the center. You look at places like Millinocket, and I'm not that familiar with it. I think Lee would have a better sense of that, but I think they're coming into their own identity and finding a new way. And certainly Bucksport has, in very short order, through a very concerted community effort, really bounced back from that their hardships. So I think you see that happening, and I do think that Bangor as a service center has served as that anchor. People were able to come here and find employment. Unfortunately, maybe they're going to leave as employment grows in their communities. That's not a good thing, but that's going to be part of the fabric as we go. The city has faced this. At the same time, the population is aging. We've also faced expansion of our economy. So we have a tight labor market. But what we are seeing statistically is some of the jobs. We have less applicants. But we're still finding applicants to fill those positions. We don't have as many, and we may need to work with them on developing skill sets to fit within it. But the workforce that we're seeing is still highly trainable and able to be working in those jobs. I think we just need to adapt some of our styles and understand that we're going to have to do more to attract them and be a place they want to be. But it's going to get a little harder as the rural communities expand. We're up to the challenge.
Other questions?
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. My husband John and I are proud boomerangs back to the state of Maine. And
Thank you.
Contributing to the growing population with a baby in January. So.
Excellent. Congratulations.
My question is changing gears slightly towards more the health and public health approach to the aging communities, and I'm not sure, maybe from the city level, maybe this will be appropriate. But to have a good economy and a good workforce, we have to have healthy. They have to be healthy individuals. So I was wondering if any of you could speak to data or practices or policies at the local or state level that will help address the health and the healthcare needs of our aging population.
So we are one of 2 cities, there are only 2 cities in the state of Maine that have a public health department. We have a very active public health department, and in fact, our Livable Cities program is really housed in our public health department through the work of Patty Hamilton and Jamie Comstock and others, but also a partnership with Eastern Agency on Aging. Everything we do is in partnership, sort of how to leverage our resources. Some of the things that they're doing, again, if I go back to the discussion, what makes a good aging place also makes a good place for everybody. If you can walk around downtown, you're going to age better. We've also spent some time starting to look at things like those blue zones, if you're familiar with the public health. And a lot of that deals with what are those factors that make communities and longevity healthy. And we've looked at that both through the public health department, but also through the work of the Community Health Leadership Board, which, for those of you who don't know, that is a collaborative of the city, St. Joe's, Eastern Maine, Northern Lights, Hanquist, why am I forgetting? PCHC, Penobscot Community Health Center, to try to address more global health issues. And I think that we have spent the last couple of years sort of focused on the opioid substance abuse disorders within our community, but we're also looking at how that affects the mental health issues. We've selected some new conversations to have. Some of those deal now with food insecurity and aging in place, and some of that overlaps. The city also, as we begin to talk about our goals and objectives from a city perspective with the council, the newly seated council, we've started to organize those. We used to organize them around issues that came before committees, and we stepped back from that this year, and the department heads are now organizing ourselves across some of those livability factors, whether we're sustainable, and what are we doing to promote sustainability within our community, what are we doing to promote aging in place, what are we doing to promote health and livability. And so we've really moved away from sort of, hey, look, we're meeting at the airport committee and we're talking about runways, to what are we doing to create multimodal transportation that everybody can enjoy. And maybe we're not doing enough in some areas, but this is now at least we're highlighting what we are doing, which also shows what we're not doing. So we're taking it very seriously in terms of how we organize ourselves. We recognize that as a community, we have to work cross departments, but also with our partner agencies, that none of us have the ability to do this and make these impacts alone, that we really need to be in partnership with people, and that resources are limited, and we need to think about how we're directing our resources to meet the overarching goals. Creating livability regardless of age is really first and foremost on that list.
Well said. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is John Coit, also a boomerang, but very happy to be here in Bangor. My question is for maybe all three of you. I think we've heard about some really interesting things that Maine and Bangor are doing from an employee perspective to help attract new people to come to Maine. And I'd be curious to know what the state or what Bangor or other cities are doing from an employer perspective to try to attract businesses to the state.
So in terms of I think both in terms of what I often talk about, just in terms of the overall economic health, but then around the 10-year plan as well. It really it's both sides of the coin need to be addressed simultaneously. I mean, we can do all this great stuff to attract people here, but if we don't also think about the business side of the picture, they're going to get here and they're going to go, where are we supposed to work again? And at the same time, if we do all sorts of business attraction and we make sure that businesses have all sorts of resources and everything that they need, if they arrive and we don't have any workers for them, they're going to be, bye, this is not the right place, because you need to have workers to be able to have a functioning business. So I think that, a lot of what we talked about in the economic plan was around providing a stable environment for businesses, a reliable environment for businesses. Also, just trying to deal with streamlining the different processes that exist from the state government perspective, so that instead of having to go to, 22 different places to change your address, you just go once and it's taken care of, and you don't have to talk to umpteen different people to do that one small change. So trying to do some of that simplification just in terms of the ease of doing business, I think, is one of the areas that we're looking at.
And I think from the Department of Labor side, what we hear most from employers is about workforce. And so what we do is we work with them to do job fairs, to help them understand through labor market information, wages and what labor pools look like. And to many employers now, different sectors are looking at things like apprenticeship programs, trying to provide information and support to them, and connecting them to skilled workers is really our key thing. There's a job bank that's offered as well, where people can post jobs for free. We can do blast emails out to employees to let them know, potential employees, what the jobs are. So to try to facilitate that job match as much as possible. There are also specific training programs for employers. So for example, where we would be working with perhaps the quality centers at the community college, where an employer would say, I've got these great people, like Cathy said, but we really need to upskill a little bit to help package those things. And those services are primarily provided out in the communities through the workforce development system. And the public-facing part of that is the Career Center, which is part of a nationwide network of one-stop shop for both employers and employees.
So at the municipal level, then we do kind of the boots on the ground with folks that are looking to relocate or to expand within our community. And Tanya Emery can do a much better job of explaining what they do. We too have looked at how we can restructure ourselves to be more streamlined. And so about 2-3 years ago, we took one position, we restructured it to be somebody who is there as a handoff. So if you come into the system and you say, I would like to open a business, or I would like to do business in Bangor, we have one sort of client rep that kind of tracks and makes sure that they're not falling through the cracks, that they're getting on the planning board when they say that they're getting to their planning permits when they need them, they're getting their code enforcement, if there's a hiccup, that there's communication, there's things like that going on, so that there's always a contact there for that individual. We're running into the challenge. One of the things that we have that's really neat, we're running out of properties, but we have the Innovation Center, and so we work in partnership with, the names just escape me. But we have, out in the Innovation Center, we're using that space for startups. Theoretically, you would come in there. We have a number of university-type spin-offs. We have Sierra Helix, and they have a new prototype program they're doing out there. So we set them up with space, and and then they can buy through mutual, like IT and things like that. We also have Higgins Fabrication. And it's escaped me too, the name of the company that was a university spin-off doing the shoes, the 3D printing of shoes, which is pretty cool technology. So we're using that. We also have a property out on Cleveland Street. It was the old Officers Club. We're working with EMDC and some other partners to think about how we might repurpose that to a food, like an innovation center incubator for food. What we see is that there are a number of small farms, and that Bangor and Maine in particular have a niche in the sense that our food comes with kind of a, like if you go with Maine blueberries, that's really special, and if you go with Maine seafood, that's really special, but there's not places for small size startups to begin to process that. So we're looking at how we repurpose some of those old military buildings to do that. For the winter, it'll be a farmer's market, but we'll continue to see and explore how we might do that.